Embera, 2 R's, is it? Double S mint of a harassed peddler while gauging the AU, the symmetry with a Y of a peeled pear under a cemetery wall. Silly, isn't it? Cemetery put in course of the account of the symmetry. I should have said when he clapped on his topper, thank you. I ought to have said something about an old hat or something. No, I could have said, looks as good as new. See his fizz then. SLLT, the nethermost deck of the first machine, jogged forward its flyboard with SLLT, the first batch of quire-folded papers. SLLT, almost human, the way at SLLT to call attention, doing its level best to speak. That door too, SLLT, creaking, asking to be shut. Everything speaks in its own way, SLLT. Noted churchman and occasional contributor. The foreman handed back the galley page suddenly, saying, Wait, where's the Archbishop's letter? It's to be repeated in the telegraph. Where's what's-his-name? He looked about him round his loud, unanswering machines. Monks, sir? A voice asked from the casting box. Aye, where's Monks? Monks. Mr. Bloom took up his cutting. Time to get out. Then I'll get the design, Mr. Nanetti, he said, and you'll give it a good place, I know. Monks. Yes, sir. 3 months renewal. Want to get some wind off my chest first. Try it anyhow. Rub in August, good idea. Horse show month. Ballsbridge. Tourist over for the show. A day father. He walked on through the case room, passing an old man, bowed, spectacled, aproned. Old Monks, the day father. Queer lot of stuff he must have put through his hands in his time. Obituary notices, pubs, ads, speeches, divorce suits. Found drowned, nearing the end of his tether now. Sober, serious man, with the bit of a savings bank, I'd say. Wife a good cook and washer. Daughter working the machine in the parlor. Plain Jane, no damn nonsense. And it was the feast of the Passover. He stayed in his walk to watch a typesetter neatly distributing type. Reads it backwards first. Quickly he does it. Must require some practice, that. MANGID KCIRTAP. Poor Papa, with his Haggadah book, reading backwards with his finger to me. Pesach. Next year in Jerusalem. Dear, oh dear, all that long business about that brought us out of the land of Egypt and into the house of bondage. Alleluia. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu. No, that's the other. Then the 12 brothers, Jacob's sons, and then the lamb and the cat and the dog and the stick and the water and the butcher. And then the angel of death kills the butcher, and he kills the ox, and the dog kills the cat. Sounds a bit silly till you come to look into it well. Justice it means, but it's everybody's eating everyone else. That's what life is, after all. How quickly he does that job. Practice makes perfect, seems to see with his fingers. Mr. Bloom passed out on the clanking noises through the gallery, onto the landing. Now am I going to tram it out all the way, and then catch him out, perhaps? Better phone him first. Number? Yes, same as Citron's house. 28. 2844. Only once more, that soap. He went down the house staircase. Who the deuce scrawled over all those walls with matches? Looks as if they did it for a bet. Heavy, greasy smell, there always is in those works. Lukewarm glue in Tom's next door when I was there. He took out his handkerchief to dab his nose. Citron lemon? Ah, the soap I put there. Lose it out of that pocket. Putting back his handkerchief, he took out the soap and stowed it away, buttoned, into the hip pocket of his trousers. What perfume does your wife use? I could go home still, tram, something I forgot, just to see. Before, dressing. No, here, no. A sudden screech of laughter came from the Evening Telegraph office. Know who that is? What's up? Pop in a minute to phone. Ned Lambert it is. He entered softly. Aaron, Green Jim of the Silver Sea. The ghost walks, Professor McHugh murmured softly, biscuitfully, to the dusty window pane. Mr. Daedalus, staring from the empty fireplace at Ned Lambert's quizzing face, asked of it sourly. Agonizing Christ, wouldn't it give you a heartburn on your arse? Ned Lambert, seated on the table, read on. Or again, note the meanderings of some purling rill as it babbles on its way, though quarreling with the stony obstacles to the tumbling waters of Neptune's blue domain, mid mossy banks, fanned by gentlest zephyrs, played on by the glorious sunlight, or neath the shadows cast o'er its pensive bosom by the overarching leafage of the giants of the forest. What about that, Simon? He asked over the fringe of his newspaper. How's that for high? Changing his drink, Mr. Daedalus said. Ned Lambert, laughing, struck the newspaper on his knees, repeating, "The pensive bosom, and the overarching leafage. Oh boys, oh boys." And Xenophon looked upon Marathon, Mr. Daedalus said, looking again on the fireplace into the window, and Marathon looked onto the sea. "That will do," Professor McHugh cried from the window. "I don't want to hear any more of this stuff." He ate off the crescent of water biscuit he had been nibbling, and hungered, made ready to nibble the biscuit in his other hand. "High fountain stuff, bladder bags. Ned Lambert is taking the day off, I see. Rather upsets a man's day, a funeral does. He has influence, they say. Old Chatterton, the vice-chancellor, is his granduncle or his great-granduncle. Close on 90, they say. Sub-leader for his death, written this long time, perhaps. Living despite them. Might go first himself. Johnny, make room for your uncle. The Right Honourable Hedges Eyre Chatterton. Dare say he writes him an odd, shaky check or two on gale days. Windfall when he kicks out. Alleluia." "Just another spasm," Ned Lambert said. "What is it?" Mr. Bloom asked. "A recently discovered fragment of Cicero," Professor McHugh answered with pomp of tone. "Our lovely land." Short, but to the point. "Whose land?" Mr. Bloom said simply. "Most pertinent question," the professor said between his chews, with an accent on the whose. "Dan Dawson's land," Mr. Daedalus said. "Is it his speech last night?" Mr. Bloom asked. Ned Lambert nodded. "But listen to this," he said. The doorknob hit Mr. Bloom in the small of the back as the door was pushed in. "Excuse me," J.J. O'Malloy said, entering. Mr. Bloom moved nimbly aside. "I beg yours," he said. "Good day, Jack." Come in, come in." "Good day. How are you, Daedalus?" "Well, and yourself?" J.J. O'Malloy shook his head. "Sad. Cleverest fellow at the junior bar he used to be. Decline, poor chap. That hectic flush spells finish for a man. Touch and go with him. What's in the wind, I wonder? Money worry? Or again, if we but climb the serried mountain peaks. You're looking extra. Is the editor to be seen?" J.J. O'Malloy asked, looking towards the inner door. "Very much so," Professor McHugh said. "To be seen and heard. He's in his sanctum with Linehan." J.J. O'Malloy strolled to the sloping desk and began to turn back the pink pages of the file. Practice dwindling, a might have been, losing heart, gambling, debts of honor, reaping the whirlwind. Used to get good retainers from D&T Fitzgerald. Their wigs to show the gray matter. Brains on their sleeve, like the statue at Glasnevin. Believe he does some literary work for the Express with Gabriel Conroy. Well-read fellow. Miles Crawford began on the Independent. Funny the way those newspaper men veer about when they get wind of a new opening. Weathercocks, hot and cold in the same breath. Wouldn't know which to believe. One story good till you hear the next. Go for one, another bald-headed in the papers, and then all blows over. Hail fellow, well met the next moment. "Ah, listen to this, for God's sake," Ned Lambert pleaded. "Or again, if we but climb the serried mountain peaks." "Bombast," the professor broke in testily. "Enough of the inflated windbag." "Peaks," Ned Lambert went on, "towering high on high, to bathe our souls, as it were." "Bathe his lips," Mr. Daedalus said. "Blessed and eternal God, yes. Is he taking anything for it?" As 'twere in the peerless panorama of Ireland's portfolio, unmatched, despite their well-praised prototypes and other vaunted prize regions, for a very beauty of bosky grove and undulating plain and luscious pastureland of vernal green, steeped in the transcendent translucent glow of our mild, mysterious Irish twilight. His native Doric. "The moon," Professor McHugh said. "He forgot Hamlet." "That mantles the vista far and wide, and wait till the glowing orb of the moon shine forth to irradiate her silver effulgence." "Oh," Mr. Daedalus cried, giving vent to a hopeless groan. "Shite and onions, that'll do, Ned. Life is too short." He took off his silk hat, and blowing out impatiently his bushy mustache, Welsh combed his hair with raking fingers. Ned Lambert tossed the newspaper aside, chuckling with delight. An instant after, a hoarse bark of laughter burst over Professor McHugh's unshaven, black-spectacled face. "Doughy daw," he cried. What Weatherup said. All very fine to jeer at it now in cold print, but it goes down like hot cake, that stuff. He was in the bakery line, too, wasn't he? Why, they call him Doughy Daw. Feathered his nest well, anyhow. Daughter engaged to that chap in the Inland Revenue Office with the motor. Hooked that nicely. Entertainments, open house, big blowout. Weatherup always said that. Get a grip on them by the stomach. The inner door was opened violently, and a scarlet-beaked face, crested by a comb of feathery hair, thrust itself in. The cold blue eyes stared about them, and the harsh voice asked, "What is it?" "And here comes the sham squire himself," Professor McHugh said grandly. "Get on out that, you bloody pedagogue," the editor said in recognition. "Come, Ned," Mr. Daedalus said, putting on his hat. "I must get a drink after that." "Drink," the editor cried. "No drink served before Mass." "Quite right, too," Mr. Daedalus said, going out. "Come on, Ned." Ned Lambert sidled down from the table. The editor's blue eyes roved towards Mr. Bloom's face, shadowed by a smile. "Will you join us, Miles?" Ned Lambert asked. Memorial battles recalled. "North Cork militia," the editor cried, striding to the mantelpiece. "We won every time, North Cork and Spanish officers." "Where was that, Miles?" Ned Lambert asked with a reflective glance at his toe caps. "In Ohio," the editor shouted. "So it was, begad," Ned Lambert agreed. Passing out, he whispered to J.J. O'Malloy, "Incipient jigs, sad case." "Ohio," the editor crowed in high treble from his uplifted scarlet face. "My Ohio." "A perfect cretic," the professor said, long, short, and long. "Oh, harp Aeolian." He took a reel of dental floss from his waistcoat pocket, and breaking off a piece, twanged it smartly between two and two of his resonant, unwashed teeth. Bing bang, bang bang. Mr. Bloom, seeing the coast clear, made for the inner door. "Just a moment, Mr. Crawford," he said. "I just want to phone about an ad." He went in. "What about that leader this evening?" Professor McHugh asked, coming to the editor and laying a firm hand on his shoulder. "That'll be all right," Miles Crawford said more calmly. "Never you fret. Hello, Jack. That's all right." "G'day, Miles," J.J. O'Malloy said, letting the pages he held slip limply back on the file. "Is that Canada swindle case on today?" The telephone whirred inside. 28. No, 20. 444? Yes. Spot the winner. Linehan came out of the inner office with sports tissues. "Who wants a dead cert for the Gold Cup?" he asked. "Scepter with O'Madden up." He tossed the tissues onto the table. Screams of newsboys' bare feet in the hall rushed near, and the door was flung open. "Hush," Linehan said. "I hear feet stoops." Professor McHugh strode across the room and seized the cringing urchin by the collar as the others scampered out the hall and down the steps. The tissues rustled up in the draught, floated softly in the air, blue scrawls, and under the table came to earth. "It wasn't me, sir. It was the big fellow shoved me, sir." "Throw him out and shut the door," the editor said. "There's a hurricane blowing." Linehan began to paw the tissues up from the floor, grunting as he stooped twice. "Was waiting for the racing special, sir," the newsboy said. "It was Pat Farrell shoved me, sir." He pointed to two faces peering in round the doorframe. "Him, sir." "Out of this with you," Professor McHugh said gruffly. He hustled the boy out and banged the door to. J.J. O'Malloy turned the files cracklingly over, murmuring, seeking. Continued on page 6, column 4. "Yes, Evening Telegraph here." Mr. Bloom phoned from the inner office. "Is the boss?" "Yes, telegraph." "To where?" "Aha. Which auction rooms?" "Aha, I see." "Right. I'll catch him." A collision ensues. The bell whirred again as he rang off. He came in quickly and bumped against Linehan, who was struggling up with the second tissue. "Pardon, monsieur," Linehan said, clutching him for an instant and making a grimace. "My fault," Mr. Bloom said, suffering his grip. "Are you hurt? I'm in a hurry." "Knee," Linehan said. He made a comic face and whined, rubbing his knee. The accumulation of the Anno Domini. "Sorry," Mr. Bloom said. He went to the door and, holding it ajar, paused. J.J. O'Malloy slapped the heavy pages over. The noise of two shrill voices, A mouth organ echoed in the bare hallway from the newsboys squatted on the doorsteps. We are the boys of Wexford, who fought with heart in hand. Exit Bloom. I'm just running round to Bachelor's Walk, Mr. Bloom said, about this ad of Key's. Want to fix it up. They tell me he's round here in Dillon's. He looked indecisively for a moment at their faces. The editor, who, leaning against the mantel shelf, had propped his head on his hand, suddenly stretched forth an arm amply. Begone, he said. The world is before you. Back in no time, Mr. Bloom said, hurrying out. J.J. O'Malloy took the tissues from Linehan's hand and read them, blowing them apart gently without comment. He'll get that advertisement, the professor said, staring through the black-rimmed spectacles over the cross-blind. Look at the young scamps after him. Show, where? Linehan cried, running to the window. A street cortege. Both smiled over the cross-blind at the file of capering newsboys in Mr. Bloom's wake, the last zigzagging white on the breeze, a mocking kite, a tail of white bowknots. Look at the young gutter snipe behind him, hue and cry, Linehan said, and you'll kick. Oh, my rib risible. Taking off his flat spogs in the walk, small nines, steal upon larks. He began to mazurka in swift caricature. Across the floor on sliding feet past the fireplace to J.J. O'Malloy, who placed the tissues in his receiving hands. What's that? Miles Crawford said with a start. Where are the other two gone? Who? The professor said, turning. They're gone round to the Oval for a drink. Paddy Hopper is there with Jack Hall. Came over last night. Come on then, Miles Crawford said. Where's my hat? He walked jerkily into the office behind, parting the vent of his jacket, jingling his keys in his back pocket. They jingled then in the air and against the wood as he locked his desk drawer. He's pretty well on, Professor McHugh said in a low voice. Seems to be, J.J. O'Malloy said, taking out a cigarette case and murmuring meditation. But it is not always as it seems. Who has the most matches? The Calumet of Peace. He offered a cigarette to the professor and took one himself. Linehan promptly struck a match for them and lit their cigarettes in turn. J.J. O'Malloy opened his case again and offered it. Thank you, Voos, Linehan said, helping himself. The editor came from the inner office, a straw hat awry on his brow. He declaimed in song, pointing sternly at Professor McHugh. 'Twas rank and fame that tempted thee, 'twas empire charmed thy heart. The professor grinned, locking his long lips. Eh? You bloody old Roman Empire. Miles Crawford said. He took a cigarette from the open case. Linehan, lighting it for him with quick grace, said, Silence for my brand new riddle. Imperium Romanum, J.J. O'Malloy said gently. It sounds nobler than British or Brixton. The word reminds one somehow of fat in the fire. Miles Crawford blew his first puff violently towards the ceiling. That's it, he said. We are the fat. You and I are the fat in the fire. We haven't got a chance of a snowball in hell. The grandeur that was Rome. Wait a moment, Professor McHugh said, raising two quiet claws. We mustn't be led away by words, by sounds of words. We think of Rome, imperial, imperious, imperative. He extended elocutionary arms from frayed, stained shirt cuffs, pausing. What was their civilization? Vast, I allow, but vile. Cloacae, sewers, the Jews in the wilderness and on the mountaintop said, It is meet to be here. Let us build an altar to Jehovah. The Roman, like the Englishman who follows in his footsteps, brought to every new shore on which he set his foot. On our shore he never set it. Only his cloacal obsession. He gazed about him in his toga and said, It is meet to be here. Let us construct a water closet. Which they accordingly did do, Linehan said. Our old ancient ancestors, as we read in the first chapter of Genesis, were partial to the running stream. They were nature's gentlemen, J.J. O'Malloy murmured, but we also have Roman law. And Pontius Pilate is its prophet, Professor McHugh responded. Do you know that story about Chief Baron Pallas? J.J. O'Malloy asked. It was at the Royal University dinner. Everything was going swimmingly. First, my riddle, Linehan said. Are you ready? Mr. O'Madden Burke, tall and copious grey of Donegal tweed, came in from the hallway. Stephen Daedalus, behind him, uncovered as he entered. Entrez, mes enfants, Linehan cried. I escort a suppliant, Mr. O'Madden Burke said melodiously. Youth, led by experience, visits notoriety. How do you do? The editor said, holding out a hand. Come in. Your governor has just gone. Question marks. Linehan said to all, "Silence. What opera resembles a railway line? Reflect, ponder, excogitate, and reply." Stefan handed over the typed sheets, pointing to the title and signature. "Who?" the editor asked. "Bit torn off." "Mr. Garrett Deasy," Stefan said. "That old Pelters," the editor said. "Who tore it? Was he short taken?" On swift sail flaming from storm and south, he comes, pale vampire, mouth to my mouth. "G'day, Stefan," the professor said, coming to peer over their shoulders. "Foot and mouth, are you turned? Bullock befriending bard?" "Shindy and well-known restaurant." "G'day, sir," Stefan answered, blushing. "The letter is not mine. Mr. Garrett Deasy asked me to." "Oh, I know him," Miles Crawford said, "and I knew his wife, too, the bloodiest old tartar God ever made. By Jesus, she had the foot and mouth disease, and no mistake. The night she threw the soup in the waiter's face in the Star and Garter, ho ho ho. A woman brought sin into the world, for Helen, the runaway wife of Menelaus, 10 years, the Greeks. O'Rourke, Prince of Breffni." "Is he a widower?" Stefan asked. "Aye, a grass one," Miles Crawford said, his eye running down the typescript. "Emperor's horse, Habsburg, an Irishman saved his life on the ramparts of Vienna. Don't you forget, Maximilian Karl O'Donnell, Graf von Tyrconnel in Ireland. Sent his heir over to make the king an Austrian field marshal now. Going to be trouble there one day, wild geese. Oh yes, every time, don't you forget that." "The moot point is did he forget," J.J. O'Malloy said quietly, turning a horseshoe paperweight. "Saving princes is a thank you job." Professor McHugh turned on him. "And if not," he said. "I'll tell you how it was," Miles Crawford began. "A Hungarian it was one day. Lost causes, noble Marquess mentioned." "We were always loyal to lost causes," the professor said. "Success for us is the death of the intellect and of the imagination. We were never loyal to the successful. We serve them. I teach the blatant Latin language. I speak the tongue of a race, the acme of those whose mentality is the maxim. Time is money, material domination. Dominus, Lord. Where is the spirituality? Lord Jesus? Lord Salisbury? A sofa in the West End Club. Ah, but the Greek. Kyrie eleison." A smile of light brightened his dark-rimmed eyes, lengthened his long lips. "The Greek," he said again. "Kyrios, shining word, the vowels of Semite and the Saxon know not. Kyrie, the radiance of the intellect. I ought to profess Greek, the language of the mind. Kyrie eleison, the closet maker, and the cloak maker will never be lords of our spirit. We are liege subjects of the Catholic chivalry of Europe that foundered at Trafalgar, and of the empire of the spirit, not an imperium. That went under with the Athenian fleets at the Aegospotami. Yes, they went under. Pyrrhus, misled by an oracle, made a last attempt to retrieve the fortunes of Greece, loyal to a lost cause. He strode away from them towards the window. They went forth to battle, Mr. O'Madden Burke said, grayly, but they always fell. Boo-hoo, Linehan wept with a little noise, owing to a brick received in the latter half of the matinee. Poor Pyrrhus. He whispered then near Stefan's ear, Linehan's limerick. There's a ponderous pundit McHugh, who wears goggles of ebony hue. As he mostly sees double, to wear them why trouble? I can't see the Joe Miller, can you? In mourning for Sallust, Mulligan says, whose mother is beastly dead. Miles Crawford crammed the sheets into a side pocket. That'll be all right, he said. I'll read the rest after. That'll be all right. Linehan extended his hands in protest. But my riddle, he said. What opera is like a railway? Opera? Mr. O'Madden Burke's sphinx face re-riddled. Linehan announced gladly. The Rose of Castile. See the wheeze? Rose of Castile? He poked Mr. O'Madden Burke mildly in the spleen. Mr. O'Madden Burke fell back with grace on his umbrella, feigning a gasp. Oh, help, he sighed. I feel a strong weakness. Linehan, rising to tiptoe, fanned his face rapidly with the rustling tissues. The professor, returning by way of the files, swept his hand across Stefan's and Mr. O'Madden Burke's loose ties. Paris, past and present, he said. You look like communards. Like fellows who had blown up the Bastille, J.J. O'Malloy said in quiet mockery. Or was it you shot the Lord Lieutenant of Finland between you? You look as though you had done the deed, General Bobrikov. Omnium gatherum. We were only thinking about it, Stefan said. All the talents, Miles Crawford said. Law, the classics. The turf, Linehan put in. Literature, the press. If Bloom were here, the professor said, the gentle art of advertisement. And Madame Bloom, Mr. O'Marden Burke said, the vocal muse, Dublin's prime favorite. Linehan gave a loud cough. Ahem, he said very softly. Oh, for a breath of fresh air. I caught a cold in the park. The gate was open. You can do it. The editor laid a nervous hand on Stefan's shoulder. I want you to write something for me, he said. Something with a bite in it. You can do it. I see it in your face, in the lexicon of youth. See it in your face, see it in your eye. Lazy, idle little schemer. Foot and mouth disease, the editor cried in scornful invective. Great nationalist meeting and Boris and Ossory. All balls, bulldozing the public. Give them something with a bite in it. Put us all into it, damn its soul. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and James McCarthy. We can all supply mental pabulum, Mr. O'Madden Burke said. Stefan raised his eyes to the bold, unheeding stare. He wants you for the press gang, J.J. O'Malloy said. The great Gallagher. You can do it, Miles Crawford repeated, clenching his hand in emphasis. Wait a minute. We'll paralyze Europe, as Ignatius Gallagher used to say when he was on the Shaw run. Doing billiard making in the Clarence. Gallagher, that was a pressman for you. That was a pen. You know how he made his mark? I'll tell you. That was the smartest piece of journalism ever known. That was in 81, 6th of May, time of the Invincibles, murder in the Phoenix Park, before you were born, I suppose. I'll show you. He pushed past them to the files. Look here, he said, turning. The New York Wild, cabled for a special. Remember that time? Professor McHugh nodded. New York World, the editor said, excitedly pushing back his straw hat. Where it took place. Tim Kelly, or Kavanaugh, I mean. Joe Brady and the rest of them. Where Skin the Goat drove the car. Whole route, see? Skin the Goat, Mr. O'Madden Burke said. Fitzharris. Has that cabman shelter, they say, down there at Butt Bridge. Holohan told me. You know Holohan? Hop and carry one, is it? Miles Crawford said. And poor Gumley is down there too, so he told me, minding stones for the corporation, a night watchman. Stefan turned in surprise. Gumley? He said. You don't say so. A friend of my father's, is it? Never mind, Gumley, Miles Crawford cried angrily. Let Gumley mind the stones, see they don't run away. Look at here. What did Ignatius Gallagher do? I'll tell you. Inspiration of genius. Cabled right away. Have you Weekly Freeman of 17th of March? Right, have you got it? He flung back the pages of the files and stuck his finger on a point. Take page 4, advertisement for Bransom's Coffee. Let us say, have you got that? Right. The telephone whirred. A distant voice. I'll answer it, the professor said, going. B is Parkgate. Good. His finger leaped and struck point after point, vibrating. T is Viceregal Lodge. C is where murder took place. K is Knockmaroon Gate. The loose flesh of his neck shook like a cock's wattles. An ill-starched dicky jutted up, and with a rude gesture he thrust it back into his waistcoat. Hello? Evening Telegraph here. Hello? Who's there? Yes? Yes? Yes. F to P is the route Skin the Goat drove the car for an alibi. Inchicore, Roundton, Windy Arbor, Palmerston Park, Ranelagh. FABP, got that? X is Davies Public House in Upper Leeson Street. The professor came to the inner door. Bloom is at the telephone, he said. Tell him to go to hell, the editor said promptly. X is Davies Public House, see? Clever, very. Clever, Linehan said, very. Gave it to them on a hot plate, Miles Crawford said, the whole bloody history. Nightmare from which you will never awake. I saw it, the editor said proudly. I was present. Dick Adams, the best-hearted bloody corkman the Lord ever put the breath of life in, and myself. Linehan bowed to a shape of air, announcing, Madame, I'm Adam, and Abel was I ere I saw Elba. History, Miles Crawford cried. The old woman of Princess Street was there first. There was weeping and gnashing of teeth over that. Out of an advertisement. Gregory Gray made the design for it. That gave him the leg up. Then Patty Hooper worked Tay Pay, who took him in on the Star. Now he's got in with Blumenfeld. That's press. That's talent. Pyat. He was all their daddies. The father of scare journalism, Linehan confirmed, and the brother-in-law of Chris Callanan. Hello? Are you there? Yes, he's here still. Come across yourself. Where do you find a pressman like that now, eh? The editor cried. He flung the pages down. Clam Dever, Linehan said to Mr. O'Madden Burke. Yeah, very smart, Mr. O'Madden Burke said. Professor McHugh came from the inner office. Talking about the Invincibles, he said. Did you see that some hawkers were up before the recorder? Oh yes, J.J. O'Malloy said eagerly. Lady Dudley was walking home through the park to see all the trees that were blown down by that cyclone last year and thought she'd buy a view of Dublin. And it turned out to be a commemoration postcard of Joe Brady, or Number One, or Skin the Goat. Right outside the Viceregal Lodge, imagine. They're only in the hook and eye department, Miles Crawford said. Pshaw, pressing the bar. Where have you a man now at the bar like those fellows, like Whiteside, like Isaac Butt, like Silver-tongued O'Hagan, eh? Ah, bloody nonsense, pshaw, only a halfpenny place. His mouth continued to twitch unspeaking in nervous curls of disdain. Would anyone wish that mouth for a kiss? How do you know? Why did you write it then? Rhymes and reasons. Mouth, south. Is the mouth south some way? Or the south a mouth? Must be some. South, pout, out, shout, drouth. Rhymes. Two men dressed the same, looking the same, 2 by 2. La toe pace, che parla ti piace, mantreco evento con facitace. He saw them 3 by 3, approaching girls in green, in rose, in russet, entwining. Per l'air passò, in mauve, in purple. Quella pacifica aurea fiamma. Gold of oriflamme. Dirirmear fepuer ardenti. But I, old men, penitent, leaden-footed, under dark neath the light, mouth south, tomb womb. Speak up for yourself, Mr. O'Madden Burke said. Sufficient for the day. J.J. O'Malloy, smiling palely, took up the gauge. My dear Miles, he said, flinging his cigarette aside, you put a false construction on my words. I hold no brief, as at present advised, for the third profession, qua profession, but your cork legs are running away with you. Why not bring in Henry Grattan, and Flood, and Demosthenes, and Edmund Burke? Ignatius Gallagher, we all know, and his Chapelizod boss, Harmsworth of the Farthing Press, and his American cousin of the Bowery Gutter Sheet, not to mention Paddy Kelly's Budget, Play Occurrences, and our watchful friend the Skibbereen Eagle. Why bring in a master of forensic eloquence like Whiteside? Sufficient for the day is the newspaper thereof. Links with bygone days of yore. Grattan and Flood wrote for this very paper, the editor cried in his face. Irish volunteers, where are you now? Established in 1763, Dr. Lucas. Who have you now, like John Philpott Curran? Pshaw. Well, J.J. Malloy said, Bush KC, for example. Bush, the editor said. Well, yes, Bush, yes. He has a strain of it in his blood. Kendall Bush, or I mean Seymour Bush. He would have been on the bench long ago, the professor said. Only for... but no matter. J.J. O'Malloy turned to Stephen and said quietly and slowly, one of the most polished periods I think I ever listened to in my life fell from the lips of Seymour Bush. I was in that case of fratricide, the child's murder case. Bush defended him. And in the porches of mine ear did pour. By the way, how did he find that out? He died in his sleep, or the other story, Beast with Two Backs? What was that? The professor asked. Italia, Magistra Artium. He spoke on the law of evidence, J.J. O'Malloy said, of Roman justice as contrasted with the earlier Mosaic Code, the Lex Talionis. And he cited the Moses of Michelangelo in the Vatican. Ha! A few well-chosen words, Linehan prefaced. Silence. Pause. J.J. O'Malloy took out his cigarette case. False lull. Something quite ordinary. Messenger took out his matchbox thoughtfully and lit his cigar. I have often thought, since on looking back over that strange time, that it was that small act, trivial in itself, that striking of that match that determined the whole aftercourse of both our lives. A polished period. J.J. O'Malloy resumed, molding his words. He said of it, that stone effigy in frozen music, horned and terrible of the human form divine, that eternal symbol of wisdom and of prophecy which, if aught that imagination or the hand of sculptor has wrought in marble of soul transfigured, and of soul transfiguring deserves to live, deserves to live. His slim hand with a wave graced echo and fall. Fine, Miles Crawford said at once. The divine afflatus, Mr. O'Madden Burke said. You like it? J.J. O'Malloy asked Stephen. Stephen, his blood wooed by grace of language and gesture, blushed. He took a cigarette from the case. J.J. O'Malloy offered his case to Miles Crawford. Linehan lit their cigarettes as before and took his trophy, saying, Muchibus thankibus. A man of high morale. Professor McGinnis was speaking to me about you, J.J. O'Malloy said to Stephen. What do you think really of that hermetic crowd, the opal hush poets? A.E., the master mystic? The Blavatsky woman started it. She was a nice old bag of tricks. A.E. has been telling some Yankee interviewer that you came to him in the small hours of the morning to ask him about planes of consciousness. McGinnis thinks you must have been pulling A.E.'s leg. He is a man of the very highest morale, McGinnis. Speaking about me, what did he say? What did he say? What did he say about me? Don't ask. No thanks, Professor McHugh said, waving the cigarette case aside. Wait a moment. Let me say one thing. The finest display of oratory I ever heard was a speech made by John F. Taylor at the College Historical Society. Mr. Justice Fitzgibbon, the present Lord Justice of Appeal, had spoken, and the paper under debate was an essay, new for those days, advocating the revival of the Irish tongue. He turned towards Miles Crawford and said, You know Gerald Fitzgibbon, then you can imagine the style of his discourse. He is sitting with Tim Healy, J.J. O'Malloy said, rumor has it, on the Trinity College Estates Commission. He is sitting with a sweet thing, Miles Crawford said, in a child's frock. Go on, well? It was the speech, mark you, the professor said, of a finished orator, full of courteous haughtiness, and pouring in chastened diction. I will not say the vials of his wrath, but pouring the proud man's contumely upon the new movement. It was then a new movement. We were weak, therefore worthless. He closed his long, thin lips an instant, but eager to be on, raised an outspanned hand to his spectacles, and with trembling thumb and ring finger, touching lightly the black rims, steadied them to a new focus. Impromptu. In ferial tone, he addressed J.J. O'Malloy. Taylor had come there, you must know, from a sick bed. That he had prepared his speech I do not believe, for there was not even one shorthand writer in the hall. His dark, lean face had a growth of shaggy beard round it. He wore a loose, white silk neckcloth, and altogether, he looked, though he was not, a dying man. His gaze turned at once, but slowly from J.J. O'Malloy's towards Stephen's face, and then bent at once to the ground, seeking. His unglazed linen collar appeared behind his bent head, soiled by his withering hair. Still seeking, he said. When Fitzgibbon's speech had ended, John F. Taylor rose to reply. Briefly, as well as I can bring them to mind, his words were these. He raised his head firmly. His eyes bethought themselves once more. Witless shellfish swam in the gross lenses to and fro, seeking outlet. He began. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, great was my admiration in listening to the remarks addressed to the youth of Ireland a moment since by my learned friend. It seemed to me that I had been transported into a country far away from this country, into an age remote from this age, that I stood in ancient Egypt, and that I was listening to the speech of some high priest of that land addressed to the youthful Moses. His listeners held their cigarettes poised to hear, their smokes ascending in frail stalks that flowered with his speech. And let our crooked smokes, noble words coming, look out, could you try your hand at it yourself? And it seemed to me that I heard the voice of that Egyptian high priest, raised in a tone of like haughtiness and like pride. I heard his words, and their meaning was revealed to me. From the fathers. It was revealed to me that those things are good, which yet are corrupted, which neither, if they are supremely good, nor unless they were good, could be corrupted. Ah, curse you, that's St. Augustine. Why will you Jews not accept our culture, our religion, and our language? You are a tribe of nomad herdsmen. We are a mighty people. You have no cities, nor no wealth. Our cities are hives of humanity, and our galleys, trireme and quadrireme, laden with all manner merchandise, furrow the waters of the known globe. You have but emerged from primitive conditions. We have a literature, a priesthood, an age-long history, and a polity. Nile, child, man, effigy. By the Nile bank, the babe Marys kneel, cradle of bulrushes. A man supple in combat, stone-horned, stone-bearded, heart of stone. You pray to a local and obscure idol. Our temples, majestic and mysterious, are the abodes of Osiris and Isis, of Horus and Amun-Ra. Yours serfdom, awe and humbleness. Ours thunder and seas. Israel is weak and few are her children. Egypt is a host and terrible are her arms. Vagrants and day laborers are you called. The world trembles at our name. A dumb belch of hunger cleft his speech. He lifted his voice above it boldly. But ladies and gentlemen, had the youthful Moses listened to and accepted that view of life, had he bowed his head and bowed his will and bowed his spirit before that arrogant admonition, he would never have brought the chosen people out of their house of bondage, nor followed the pillar of the cloud by day. He would never have spoken with the Eternal amid lightnings on Sinai's mountaintops, nor ever have come down with the light of inspiration shining in his countenance, and bearing in his arms the tables of the law, graven in the language of the outlaw. He ceased and looked at them, enjoying a silence. Ominous, for him. J.J. O'Malloy said, not without regret, and yet he died without having entered the land of promise. A sudden at the moment, though from lingering illness. Often previously expectorated demise, Linehan added, and with a great future behind him. The troop of bare feet was heard rushing along the hallway and pattering up the staircase. That is oratory, the professor said, uncontradicted. Gone with the wind, host at Mullaghmast, and Terra of the kings. Miles of ears of porches, the tribune's words, howled and scattered to the four winds. A people sheltered within his voice, dead noise, Akashic records of all that ever anywhere, wherever was. Love and laud him, me no more. I have money. Gentlemen, Stephen said, as the next motion on the agenda paper, may I suggest that the House do now adjourn? You take my breath away. It is not perchance a French compliment? Mr. O'Madden Burke asked. 'Tis the hour, methinks, when the wine jug, metaphorically speaking, is most grateful in ye ancient hostelry. That it be, and hereby is resolutely resolved. All that are in favor say aye, Linehan announced. The contrary, no. I declare it carried. To which particular boozing shed, my casting vote is Mooney's. He led the way, admonishing, We will sternly refuse to partake of strong waters, will we not? Yes, we will not, by no manner of means. Mr. O'Madden Burke, following close, said with an ally's lunge of his umbrella, Lay on, Macduff. Chip off the old block, the editor cried, clapping Stephen on the shoulder. Let us go. Where are those blasted keys? He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the crushed type sheets. Foot and mouth, I know. That'll be all right. That'll go in. Where are they? That's all right. He thrust the sheets back and went into the inner office. Let us hope. J.J. O'Malloy, about to follow him in, said quietly to Stephen, I hope you will live to see it published. Miles, one moment. He went into the inner office, closing the door behind him. Come along, Stephen, the professor said. That is fine, isn't it? It has the prophetic vision. Fuit Ilium. The sack of windy Troy, kingdoms of this world. The masters of the Mediterranean are Fellahin today. The first newsboy came pattering down the stairs at their heels and rushed out into the street, yelling, Racing special! Dublin, I have much, much to learn. They turned to the left along Abbey Street. I have a vision too, Stephen said. Yes, the professor said, skipping to get into step. Crawford will follow. Another newsboy shot past them, yelling as he ran, Racing special! Dear dirty Dublin. Dubliners, 2 Dublin Vestals, Stephen said, elderly and pious, have lived 50 and 53 years in Fumbly's Lane. Where is that? The professor asked. Off Blackpits, Stephen said. Damp night, reeking of hungry dough, against the wall. face glistering tallow under her Faustian shawl. Frantic hearts, Akasic records. Quicker, darlint. Oh, now, dare it, let there be life. They want to see the views of Dublin from the top of Nelson's Pillar. They save up 3 and 10 pence in a red 10 letterbox money box. They shake out the 3-penny bits and 6 pences and coax out the pennies with the blade of a knife. 2 and 3 in silver and 1 and 7 in coppers. They put on their bonnets and best clothes and take their umbrellas for fear it may come on to rain. Wise virgins, Professor McHugh said. Life on the raw. They buy 1 and 4 pence worth of brawn and 4 slices of pan loaf at the North City dining rooms in Marlborough Street from Miss Kate Collins, proprietress. They purchase 4 and 20 ripe plumes from a girl at the foot of Nelson's Pillar to take off the thirst of the brawn. They give 2 3-penny bits to the gentleman at the turnstile and begin to waddle slowly up the winding staircase, grunting, encouraging each other, afraid of the dark, panting. One asking the other, have you the brawn? Praising God and the Blessed Virgin, threatening to come down, peeping at the air slits. Glory be to God. They had no idea it was that high. Their names are Anne Kearns and Florence McCabe. Anne Kearns has the lumbago for which she rubs on Lord's water, given her by a lady who got a bottleful from a passionist father. Florence McCabe takes a crubbing and a bottle of double X for supper every Saturday. Anathesis, the professor said, nodding twice. Vestal virgins. I can see them. What's keeping our friend? He turned. A bevy of scampering newsboys rushed down the steps, scattering in all directions, yelling, their white papers fluttering. Hard after them, Miles Crawford appeared on the steps, his hat aureoling his scarlet face, talking with J.J. O'Malloy. Come along, the professor cried, waving his arm. He set off again to walk by Stephen's side. Return of Bloom. Yes, he said, I see them. Mr. Bloom, breathless, caught in a whirl of wild newsboys near the offices of the Irish Catholic and Dublin Penny Journal, called, Mr. Crawford, a moment. Telegraph, racing special. What is it? Miles Crawford said, falling back a pace. A newsboy cried in Mr. Bloom's face. Terrible tragedy in Rathmines. A child bit by a bellows. Interview with the editor. Just this ad, Mr. Bloom said, pushing through towards the steps, puffing and taking the cutting from his pocket. I spoke with Mr. Keyes just now. He'll give a renewal for 2 months, he says. After, he'll see, but he wants a pair to call attention in the Telegraph, too. The Saturday Pink. And he wants it copied if it's not too late. I told Councillor Nanetti from the Kilkenny People. I can have access to it in the National Library. House of Keys, don't you see? His name is Keyes. It's a play on the name. But he practically promised he'd give the renewal, but he wants just a little puff. What will I tell him, Mr. Crawford? K.M.A. Will you tell him he can kiss my arse? Miles Crawford said, throwing out his arm for emphasis. Tell him that straight from the stable. A bit nervy, look out for squalls. All off for a drink, arm in arm. Linehan's yachting cap on a cadge beyond. Usual blarney. Wonder, is that young Daedalus the moving spirit? Has a good pair of boots on him today. Last time I saw him, he had his heels on view. Been walking amuck somewhere, careless chap. What was he doing in Irishtown? Well, Mr. Bloom said, his eyes returning, if I can get the design, I suppose it's worth a short par. He'd give the ad, I think. I'll tell him. K.M.R.I.A. He can kiss my royal Irish arse, Miles Crawford cried loudly over his shoulder. Anytime he likes, tell him. While Mr. Bloom stood weighing the point and about to smile, he strode on jerkily. Raising the wind. Nullabona, Jack, he said, raising his hand to his chin. I'm up to here. I've been through the hoop myself. I was looking for a fellow to back a bill for me no later than last week. Sorry, Jack, you must take the will for the deed. With a heart and a half if I could raise the wind anyhow. J.J. O'Malloy pulled a long face and walked on silently. They caught up on the others and walked abreast. When they have eaten the brawn and the bread and wiped their 20 fingers in the paper, the bread was wrapped. In they go near to the railings. Something for you, the professor explained to Miles Crawford. 2 old Dublin women on the top of Nelson's Pillar. Some call him. That's what Wadler 1 said. That's news, Miles Crawford said. That's copy. Out for the waxies, Dargle. 2 old trickies. What? But they're afraid the pillar will fall, Stefan went on. They see the roofs and argue about where the different churches are. Rathmine's Blue Dome, Adam and Eve's, St. Lawrence O'Toole's. But it makes them giddy to look, so they pull up their skirts. Those slightly rambunctious females. Easy all, Miles Crawford said. No poetic license. We're in the archdiocese here. And settle down on their striped petticoats, peering up at the statue of the one-handled adulterer. One-handled adulterer, the professor cried. I like that. I see the idea. I see what you mean. Dames donate Dublin's Sitz speed pills, Felicitas Aerolis belief. It gives them a crick in their necks, Stefan said, and they're too tired to look up or down or to speak. They put the bag of plums between them and eat the plums out of it, one after another, wiping off with their handkerchiefs the plum juice that dribbles out of their mouths and spitting the plumstones slowly between the railings. He gave a sudden, loud, young laugh as a close. Lenehan and Mr. O'Madden Burke, hearing, turned, beckoned, and led on across towards Mooney's. Finished? Miles Crawford said. So long as they do no worse. Sophist wallops, haughty Helen's square on proboscis. Spartans gnash molars, Ithacans vow pin as champ. You remind me of Anasthenes, the professor said, a disciple of Gorgias, the sophist. It is said of him that none could tell if he were bitterer against others or against himself. He was the son of a noble and a bondwoman, and he wrote a book in which he took away the palm of beauty from Argive Helen, and handed it to poor Penelope. Poor Penelope, Penelope rich. They made ready to cross O'Connell Street. Hello there, Central. At various points along the 8 lines tramcars with motionless trolleys stood in their tracks, bound for or from Rathmines, Rathfarnham, Blackrock, Kingston and Dalkey, Sandymount Green, Ringsend and Sandymount Tower, Donnybrook, Palmerston Park, and Upper Rathmines, all still becalmed in short circuit. Hackney cars, cabs, delivery wagons, mail vans, private brooms, aerated mineral water floats with rattling crates of bottles, rattled, rolled, horse-drawn, rapidly. What? And likewise? Where? But what do you call it? Miles Crawford asked. Where did they get the plums? Virgilian, says Pedagogue, sophomore plumps for old man Moses. Call it. Wait, the professor said, opening his long lips wide to reflect. Call it, let me see. Call it Deus Nobis Hysodia Facit. No, Stefan said. I call it a Pisgah Side of Palestine, or the Parable of the Plums. I see, the professor said. He laughed richly. I see, he said again with new pleasure. Moses in the Promised Land. We gave him that idea, he added to J.J. O'Malloy. Horatio is cynosure this fair June day. J.J. O'Malloy sent a weary, sidelong glance toward the statue and held his peace. I see, the professor said. He halted on Sir John Gray's pavement island and peered aloft at Nelson through the meshes of his wry smile. Diminished digits proved too titillating for frisky frumps, Anne Wimbles, Flo Wangles, yet can you blame them? One-handled adulterer, he said, smiling grimly. That tickles me, I must say. Tickled the old ones, too, Miles Crawford said, if the God Almighty's truth was known. Pineapple Rock, Lemon Platt, Butterscotch, a sugar-sticky girl shoveling scoopfuls of creams for a Christian brother. Some school treat, bad for their tummies, lozenge and comfit manufacture to His Majesty the King. God save our, sitting on his throne, sucking red jujubes white. A somber YMCA man, watchful among the warm sweet fumes of Graham lemons, placed a throwaway in the hand of Mr. Bloom. Heart-to-heart talks. Blue. Me? No. Blood of the Lamb. His slow feet walked him riverward, reading. Are you saved? All are washed in the blood of the Lamb. God wants blood victim. Birth, hymen, martyr, war, foundation of a building, sacrifice, kidney burnt offering, druids' altars. Elijah is coming. Dr. John Alexander Dowie, restorer of the church in Zion, is coming. Is coming, is coming, is coming. All heartily welcome. Paying game. Tory and Alexander last year. Polygamy. His wife will put the stopper on that. Where was that ad, some Birmingham firm, the luminous crucifix? Our Savior, wake up in the dead of night and see him on the wall, hanging. Pepper's ghost idea, iron nails ran in. Phosphorus it must be done with. If you leave a bit of codfish, for instance, I could see the bluery silver over it. Night I went down to the pantry in the kitchen. Don't like all the smells in it, waiting to rush out. What was it she wanted? The Malaga raisins, thinking of Spain, before Rudy was born. The phosphorescence, that bluery greeny. Very good for the brain. From Butler's Monument House corner, he glanced along Bachelor's Walk. Daedalus's daughter, there still outside Dylan's auction rooms, must be selling off some old furniture. Knew her eyes at once from the father, lobbing about, waiting for him. Home always breaks up when the mother goes. 15 children he had. Birth every year almost. That's in their theology, or the priest won't give the poor woman the confession, the absolution. Increase and multiply. Did you ever hear such an idea? Eat you at a house and home, no families themselves to feed, living on the fat of the land. Their butteries and larders. I'd like to see them do the Black Fast, Yom Kippur. Crossbuns, one meal and a collation for fear he'd collapse on the altar. A housekeeper of one of those fellows if you could pick it out of her. Never pick it out of her. Like getting LSD out of him. Does himself well. No guests. All for number one. Watching his water. Bring your own bread and butter. His reverence, mum's the word. Good Lord, that poor child's dress is in flitters. Underfed she looks too. Potatoes and marge, marge and potatoes. It's after they feel it. Proof of the pudding. Undermines the Constitution. As he set foot on O'Connell Bridge, a puffball of smoke plumed up from the parapet. Brewery barge with exploit stout. England, sea air sours it, I hear. Be interesting someday. Get a pass through Hancock to see the brewery. Regular world in itself. Vats of port are wonderful. Rats get in it too. Drink themselves bloated as big as a collie floating. Dead drunk on the porter. Drink till they puke again, like Christians. Imagine drinking that. Rats, vats. Well, of course, if we knew all the things. Looking down, he saw, flapping strongly, wheeling between the gaunt quay walls, gulls. Rough weather outside, if I threw myself down. Reuben J.'s son must have swallowed a good bellyful of that sewage, 1 and 8 pence too much. It's the droll way he comes out with the things, knows how to tell a story, too. They wheeled lower, looking for grub. Wait. He threw down among them a crumpled paper ball. Elijah, 32 feet per second, is calm. Not a bit. The ball bobbed, unheeding, on the wake of swells, floated under by the bridge piers. Not such damn fools. Also the day I threw that stale cake out of Aaron King's, picked it up in the wake of 50 yards astern, live by their wits, they wheeled, flapping. The hungry famished gull flaps o'er waters dull. That is how poets write, the similar sounds, but then Shakespeare has no rhymes, blank verse. The flow of the language it is, the thoughts, solemn. Hamlet, I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain time to walk the earth. 2 apples a penny, 2 for a penny. His gaze passed over the glazed apples, serried on her stand. Australians, they must be this time of year. Shiny peels, polishes them up with a rag or a handkerchief. Wait, those poor birds. He halted again and brought from the old apple woman 2 Banbury cakes for a penny and brought the brittle paste and threw its fragments down into the Liffey. See that? The gulls swooped silently. 2, then all from their heights pouncing on prey. Gone, every morsel. Aware of their greed and cunning, he shook the powdery crumbs from his hand. They never expected that. Mana. Live on fish, fishy flesh they have. All seabirds, gulls, sea goose. Swans from Anna Liffey swim down here sometimes to preen themselves. No accounting for tastes. Wonder what kind does swan meat? Robinson Crusoe had to live on them. They wheeled, flapping weakly. I'm not going to throw any more. Penny is quite enough. Lot of thanks I get. Not even a caw. They spread foot and mouth disease too. If you cram a turkey, say on chestnut meal, it tastes like that. Eat pig like pig. But then, why is that saltwater fish are not salty? How is that? His eyes sought answer from the river and saw a rowboat rock at anchor on the Triackley swells lazily its plaster board. Kino's 11, trousers. Good idea, that. Wonder if he pays rent to the corporation. How can you own water, really? It's always flowing in a stream, never the same, which in the stream of life we trace, because life is a stream. All kinds of places are good for ads. That quack doctor for the clap used to be stuck up in all the greenhouses. Never see it now, strictly confidential. Dr. High Franks. Didn't cost him a red like McGinney, the dancing master self-advertisement. Got fellows to stick them up, or stick them up for himself for that matter, on the QT running in to loosen a button. Fly by night, just the place too. Post no bills, post 110 pills. Some chap with a dose burning him. If he... Oh. Eh? No, I don't believe it. He wouldn't surely. No. Mr. Bloom moved forward, raising his troubled eyes. Think no more about that. After one, time ball on the ballast office is down. Dunsink time. Fascinating little book is, of Sir Robert Ball's. Parallax. I never exactly understood. There's a priest, could ask him. Par, it's Greek. Parallel, parallax. Metempsychosis, she called it, till I told her about the transmigration. Oh, rocks. Mr. Bloom smiled. Oh, rocks had 2 windows of the ballast office. She's right, after all. Only big words for ordinary things on account of the sound. She's not exactly witty. Can be rude, too. Blurt out what I was thinking. Still, I don't know. She used to say Ben Dollard had a bass barrel-tone voice. He has legs like barrels, and you'd think he was singing into a barrel. Now isn't that wit? They used to call him Big Ben. Not half as witty as calling him bass barrel-tone. Appetite like an albatross. Get outside of a baron of beef. Powerful man he was at stowing away #1 bass. Barrel of bass, see? It all works out. A procession of white-smocked sandwichmen marched slowly towards him along the gutter, scarlet sashes across their boards. Bargains, like that priest they are this morning. We have sinned. We have suffered. He read the scarlet letters on their 5 tall white hats. HELYS. Wisdom Hellies. Why, lagging behind a shrew, a chunk of bread from under his foreboard. Crammed it into his mouth and munched as he walked. Our staple food. 3 bob a day, walking along the gutters street after street. Just keep skin and bone together, bread and skilly. They're not Boyle. No, Glades men. Doesn't bring in any business either. I suggested him about a transparent show cart with 2 smart girls sitting inside writing letters, copybooks, envelopes, blotting paper. I bet that would have caught on. Smart girls writing something, catching the eye at once. Everyone dying to know what she's writing. Get 20 of them round if you stare at nothing. Have a finger in the pie. Women too. Curiosity, pillar of salt. Wouldn't have it, of course, because he didn't think of it himself first. Or the ink bottle, I suggested, with a false stain of black celluloid. His ideas for ads like plum trees potted under the obituaries, cold meat department. You can't lick 'em.